Hello, welcome back to Warrior Wednesday. I know uh, it is December 15th, and I know my friend has something announced for from their cousin. So, hear anything in the background? That's just my family. They're weird. Welcome back to Warrior Wednesday. If you're new here, hi. I'll explain. So, Warrior Wednesday is where I read an audiobook each Wednesday. So, Warrior Wednesday. What book is it? Well, it's a book series called Warrior Cats, I guess. It's originally called Warriors, but the community likes to call it Warrior Cats. But I am reading the first book, the first ever book of the series. So, let's begin, shall we? Chapter 1. It was very dark. Rusty could sense something was near. The young tomcat's eyes opened wide as he scanned the dense undergrowth. This place was unfamiliar, but the strange sense drew him onwards, deeper into the shadows. His stomach growled, reminding him of the hunger. He opened his jaws slightly and let the warm smells of the forest reach the sense glands on the roof of his mouth. Musty odors of leaf moldwood mingled with tempting aroma with a small furry creature. Suddenly, a flash of gray raced past him. Rusty stopped still, listening. It was hiding in the leaves, less than 2 tail lengths away. Rusty knew it was a mouse. He could feel the rapid pulsing of a tiny heart deep within his ear fur. He swallowed, stifling his rumbling stomach. Soon his hunger would be satisfied. Slowly he lowered his body into position, crouching for the attack. He was downwind of the mouse. He knew it was not aware of him. With one final check of his prey position, Rusty pushed back hard on his haunches and sprang, kicking up the leaves on the forest floor as he rose. The mouse dived for cover, heading towards a hole in the ground, but Rusty was already on top of it. He scooped it up into the air, hooking the helpless creature with his thorn-sharp claws, flinging it up into a high arc onto the leaf-covered ground, and the mouse landed dazed but alive. It tried to run, but Rusty snatched it up again. He tossed the mouse once more, this time a little farther away. The mouse managed to scramble up a few paces before Rusty caught up to it. Suddenly a noise roared nearby. Rusty looked around, and as he did, the mouse was able to pull away from his claws. When Rusty turned back, he saw it dart into the darkness among the tangled roots in a tree. Angry, Rusty gave up the hunt. He spun around, his green eyes glaring intense on searching out the noise that had cost him his kill. The sound rattled on, becoming more familiar. Rusty blinked open his eyes. The forest had disappeared. He was inside a hot, airless kitchen, curled in his bed. Moonlight flittered through the window, casting shadows on the smooth, hard floors. The noise had been the rattling of hard, dried pellets of food. They were ripped into his dish. Rusty had been dreaming. Lifting his head, he rested his chin on the side of his bed. His collar rubbed uncomfortably around his neck. In his dream, he had felt fresh air ruffling on the soft fur where the collar usually pinched. Rusty rolled on his back, savoring the dream for a few moments more. He could still smell mouse. It was the third time since since full moon that he had dreamed, and every time the mouse had escaped his grasp, he licked his lips. From his bed he could smell the bland odor of his food. His owners always refilled his dish before they went to bed. The dusty smell chased away the warm sense of his dream, but the hunger rumbled in his stomach, so Rusty stretched the sleep out of his limbs, and padded across the kitchen floor to his dinner. The food felt dry and tasteless on his tongue. Rusty reluctantly swallowed one more mouthful. Then he turned away from the food dish and pushed his way through the cat flap, hoping that the smell of the garden would bring back more of the feeling from his dreams. Outside, the moon was bright. It was raining lightly. Rusty stalked down the tidy garden, following the starlit gravel path, feeling the stones cold and sharp beneath his paws, made it feel his dirt beneath a large bush with glossy leaves and heavy purple flowers. Their sickly sweet scent clouded the damp air around him, and he curled his lip to drive the smell out of his nostrils. Afterwards, Rusty settled down on top of one of the point of the fence that marked his limits around his garden. It was his favorite spot of his, as he could see right into the neighboring gardens, as well as the dense green forest on the other side of the garden fence. The rain had stopped beneath him, and the close-cropped lawn was bathed in moonlight, but beyond his fence, the woods were full of shadows. Rusty stretched his head forward to take a sniff of the damp air. His skin was warm and dry under his thick coat, but he could feel the weight of the raindrops that sparkled on his ginger fur. He heard his owners giving him one last call from the back door. If he went with them now, they would greet him with gentle words and caress and welcome him onto their bed, where he would curl purring, warm in the crook of a bent knee. But this time Rusty ignored his owners' voices and turned his gaze back into the forest. The crisp smell of the woods had grown fresher after the rain. Suddenly, the fur on his spine prickled. Was something moving out there? Was something watching him? Rusty stared ahead, but it was impossible to see or smell anything in the dark tree-scent air. He lifted his chin boldly, stood up, and stretched one paw, gripping each corner of the fence post as he straightened his legs and arched his back. He closed his eyes and breathed in the smell of the woods once more. It seemed to promise him something tempting him onwards into the whispering shadows. Tensing his muscles, he crouched for a moment. Then he leaped slightly down to the rough grass on the other side of the garden fence. As he landed, the bell on his collar rang out through the still night air. "Where are you off to, Rusty?" meowed a familiar voice behind him. Rusty looked up. A young black and white cat was balancing ungracefully on the fence. "Hello, Smudge," Rusty replied. "You're not going out to the woods, are you?" Smudge's amber eyes were huge. "Just for a look," Rusty promised, shifting uncomfortably. "You wouldn't get me in there. It's dangerous." Smudge wrinkled his black nose with distaste. "Henry said he went into the forest once." The cat lifted his head, gestured with his nose over the rows of the fences towards the garden where Henry lived. "That fat old tabby never went into the woods," Rusty scoffed. He's hardly been beyond his own garden since the trip to the vet. All he wants to do is eat and sleep. Not really. He caught a robin there, Smudge insisted. Well, if he did it was before the vet. Now he complains about birds because they're disturbing his dozing. Well, anyways, Smudge went on, ignoring the scorn in Rusty's mew. Henry told me that there are all sorts of dangerous animals out there. Huge wildcats who eat rabbits for breakfast, sharpen their teeth on old bones. I'm only going for a look around, Rusty meowed. I won't stay long. Well, don't say I didn't warn you, purred Smudge. The black and white cat turned and plunged out of the fence back, down into his own garden. Rusty sat down on the coarse grass beyond the garden fence. He gave his shoulder a nervous lick, and wondered how much of Smudge's gossip was true. Suddenly, the movement of a tiny creature caught his eye. He watched it scuttle under some brambles. Instincts made him drop into a low crouch. With one slow paw after another, he drew his body forward towards the undergrowth. Ears prickled, nostrils flared, eyes unblinking. He moved towards the animal. He could see it clearly now, sitting up among the barbed branches, nibbling on the large seed held in his paws. It was a mouse. Rusty rocked his haunches from side to side, preparing to leap. He held his breath in case the bell rang again. Excitement coursed through him, making his heart pound. This was even better than his dreams. Then a sudden noise, crackling twigs and crunching leaves, made him jump. The bell rang treacherously, and the mouse darted away into the thickest tangle of the bramble bush. Rusty stood up very still and looked around. He could see a white tip of a red bushy tail trailing through a clump of tall ferns up ahead. He smelled a strong, strange scent. Definitely a meat eater, but neither cat nor dog. Distracted, Rusty forgot about the mouse and watched the red tail curiously. He wanted to take a better look. All of Rusty's senses strained ahead as he prowled forwards. Then he detected another noise. It came from behind, but it sounded muted and distant. He swerved his ears back and to hear it better. Paw steps? He wondered, but he kept his eyes fixed on the strange red fur up ahead and continued to creep onwards. It was only when the faint rustling behind him became loud and fast approaching, leaf crackled, that Rusty realized. Oh God. That Rusty realized he was in danger. The creature hit him like an explosion, and Rusty was thrown sideways into a clump of needles, twisting and yowling. He tried to throw off the attacker, but with that had fastened itself onto his back. It was gripping him with incredibly sharp claws. Rusty could feel spiked teeth pricking at his neck. He writhed and squirmed from whisker to tail. He couldn't free himself for a second. He felt helpless. Then he froze, thinking fast. He flipped over to his back. He knew instinctively how dangerous it was to expose his soft belly, but it was his only chance. He was lucky. He pulled it up to work to hear a huff behind him as the breath was knocked out of the attacker. Thrashing fiercely, Rusty managed to wriggle free without looking back, and squinted and sprang towards his home behind him. A rush of paw steps told Rusty his attacker was giving a chase. Even though his pain from his scratches stung beneath his fur, Rusty decided he would rather turn and fight than let himself be jumped on again. He skidded to stop and spun around as he faced his pursuer. It was another kitten, with a thick coat of shaggy gray fur, strong legs, and a broad face and a heartbeat. Rusty smelled that it was a tom, and sensed the power and the sturdy shoulders underneath the soft coat. Then the kitten crashed into Rusty at full pelt. Taken by surprise, Rusty turned about. It fell back onto a dazed heap. Impact knocked the breath out of Rusty. It, and he staggered. He quickly found his footing and arched his back, puffing out his orange fur, ready to spring onto the other kitten. But his attacker simply sat up and began to lick his forepaws, all signs of aggression gone. Rusty felt strangely disappointed. Every part of him was tense, ready for battle. "Hi there, kitty pet," meowed the gray Tom cheerily. "You put up quite a fight for a tame kitty." Rusty remained on tiptoe for a second, wondering whether to attack anyways. Then he remembered the strength that felt on the kitten's paws. Then he had pinned him onto the ground. He dropped to his pads, loosened his muscles, and let a spine unbend. "And I'll fight you again if I have to," he growled. "I'm Graypaw, by the way," the gray kitten went on, ignoring Rusty's threat. "I'm training to be a ThunderClan warrior." Rusty remained silent. He didn't understand what this gray what's-it was meowing about, but he sensed that the threat had passed. He hid his confusion by leaning down to lick his ruffled chest. What's a kitty pet like you doing out in the woods? Don't you know it's dangerous?" asked Graypaw. "If you're the most dangerous thing in the woods has to offer, I think I can handle it," Rusty bluffed. Graypaw looked at him for a moment, narrowing his big yellow eyes. "Well, I'm far from the most dangerous thing. If I were even half a warrior, I'd give an intruder like you some real wounds to think about." Rusty felt a thrill of fear at these anonymous words. What did this cat mean by intruder? "Anyways," meowed Graypaw, using his sharp teeth to tug a clump of grass beneath his paws, "I didn't think it was worth hurting you. You're obviously not from one of the other clans." "Other clans?" Rusty echoed, confused. Graypaw let out an impatient hiss. "You must have heard of the 4 warrior clans that hunt around here. I belong to ThunderClan. The other clans are always trying to steal prey from our territory, especially ShadowClan. They're so fierce they would have ripped you into shreds, no questions asked." Graypaw paused to split angrily and continued. "They come to take prey that's rightfully ours. It's the job of ThunderClan warriors to keep them out of our territory, and when I've finished with my training, I'll be so dangerous, I'll have the other clans shaking in their flea-bitten skins. They won't dare come near us then." Rusty narrowed his eyes. This must be one of the wildcats Smudge warned him about. He lived rough in the woods, hunting and fighting each other for every last scrap of food. Yet Rusty didn't feel scared, in fact. It was hard to admire the confident kitten. "So you're not a warrior yet?" he asked. "Why? Did you think I was?" Graypaw purred proudly. Then he shook his wide, furry head. "I won't be a real warrior for ages. I have to go through the training first. Kids have to be 6 months old before they even begin training. Tonight is my first out as an apprentice. Why don't you find yourself an owner with a nice cozy house instead? Your life will be so much easier, Rusty meowed. There are plenty of house folks who take a kitten like you. All you have to do is sit there where they can see you and look hungry for a couple of days. And they'd feed me pellets that look like rabbit droppings and soft slop, Grave Paw interrupted. No way! I can't think of anything worse than being a kitty pet. They're nothing but two-legged toys, eating stuff that doesn't look like food, making dirt in a box of gravel, sticking their noses outside only when the two legs allow them. That's no life. Out here it's wild and free. We come and go as we please. He finished his speech with a proud spit, then then meowed mischievously. Until you've tasted a fresh killed mouse, you haven't lived. Have you ever tasted a mouse? No, Rusty admitted, a little defendedly. Not yet. I guess you'll never understand. Graypaw sighed. You weren't born wild. That makes a big difference. You need to be born with warrior blood in your veins, or the feel of the wind in your whiskers. Kitties born in two-leg nests could never feel the same way. Rusty remembered that what he had felt in his dreams. That's not true, he meowed. Graypaw didn't reply. The sudden stiff, mild lick, one paw still raised and sniffed the air. I smell cats from my own clan, he hissed. You should go. They won't be pleased to find you hunting in our territory. Rusty looked around, wondering how Graypaw knew any cats was approaching. He couldn't smell anything different on the leaf-scented breeze. But his fur stood up on end, the note of urgency of Graypaw's voice. Quick! Hissed Graypaw. Run! Rusty prepared to spring into the bushes, knowing which way was safe to jump. He was too late. A voice behind him, firm and menacing. What's going on here? Rusty turned to see a large gray she-cat strolling majestically out of the undergrowth. She was magnificent. The white hairs streaked her muzzle, and on an ugly scar on the fur across her shoulders. But her smooth gray coat shone like silver in the moonlight. Blue Star! Beside Rusty, Graypaw crouched down and narrowed his eyes. He crouched even lower when a second cat, a handsome golden tom, followed the great cat into the clearing. You shouldn't be near the two-leg place, Graypaw, growled the golden tabby angrily, narrowing his green eyes. I know, Lionheart. I'm sorry. Graypaw looked down at his paws. Rusty copied Graypaw and crouched low onto the forest floor, his ears twitching nervously. Had these cats had an air of strength? He had never seen any of his garden friends. Maybe what Smudge had warned him about was true. Who's this? Asked the she-cat. Rusty flinched, and she turned her gaze on him. Her piercing blue eyes made him feel even more vulnerable. He's no threat, mewed Graypaw quickly. He's not another clan warrior. He's just a two-leg pet beyond our territories. Just a two-leg pet? The words inflamed Rusty, but he held his tongue. The warning look in Blue Star's stare told him that he had observed the anger in his eyes. He looked away. This is Blue Star. She's the leader of my clan, Graypaw hissed to Rusty under his breath. And that's Lionheart. He's my mentor, which means he's training me to become a warrior. Thank you for the introduction, Graypaw, meowed Lionheart coolly. Blue Star was still staring at Rusty. You fight well for a kitty pet, she meowed. Rusty and Graypaw exchanged confused glances. How could she know? We have been watching you both, Blue Star went on, as if she could read their thoughts. We wondered how you would deal with an intruder, Graypaw. You attacked him bravely. Graypaw looked pleased at Blue Star's praise. Sit up, both of you. Blue Star looked at Rusty. You too, kitty pet. He sat up immediately and held Blue Star's gaze, even though as she adjusted him. You reacted well to the attack, kitty pet. Graypaw is stronger than you, but you used your wits to defend yourself. And you turned to face him when he chased you. I've not seen a kitty pet do that before. Rusty managed to nod his thanks, taken aback by such an unexpected praise. Her words surprised him even more. I have been wondering how you would perform here, beyond the two-leg place. We patrol this border frequently, so I have often seen you sitting in your boundaries, staring into the forest. And now at last, you dared to place your paws here. Blue Star stared Rusty thoughtfully. You seem to have a natural hunting ability. Sharp eyes would have caught that mouse if you had not hesitated so long. Really? Rusty stammered. Lionheart spoke out. His deep meow was respectful but instant. Blue Star, this is a kitty pet. He should not be hunting in ThunderClan territory. Send him to his home to his two legs. Rusty prickled at Lionheart's dismissive words. Send me home? He meowed impatiently. Blue Star's words had made him glow with pride. But she had noticed him. She had been impressed by him. I have only come here to hunt for a mouse or two. It's not like I'm sure there's enough to go around. Blue Star had turned her head to acknowledge Lionheart's words. But now her gaze snapped back to Rusty. Her blue eyes were blazing with anger. There is never enough food. There is never enough to go around, she spat. If you didn't have to live such a soft, overfed life, you would know that. Rusty was confused, but by Blue Star's sudden range. But one glance had the horrified look on Graypaw's face was enough to tell him that he had spoken too fiercely. Lionheart stepped into his leader's side. Both warriors loomed over him now. Rusty looked into Blue Star's threatening stare, and his pride dissolved. These were not the cozy fireside cats he was dealing with. They were mean, hungry cats who were probably going to finish what Graypaw had started.